Hello and welcome to the Nonprofit Leaders Network podcast. Susan Warshaw, Executive Director of Grades of Green based in California, will be sharing with us today about leading and managing a board through change.
Welcome to the Nonprofit Leaders Network podcast, where your host, KIRSTEN BULLOCK, interviews nonprofit CEOs and executive directors who share what's working. Show notes can be found at nonprofitleadersnetwork.com. Please add the podcast to your favorite RSS feed or iTunes. Now, let's get on with the show.
Hi, Susan. Thanks so much for joining me today.
It's a pleasure to be with you.
Susan currently serves as the Executive Director of Grades of Green. She's an experienced leader in the education nonprofit sector, and she previously held the position of Executive Director at the Manhattan Beach Education Foundation, where she raised millions of dollars annually for programs that inspire learning, enrich teaching, and promote innovation and academic excellence in Manhattan Beach public schools. In addition, Warshaw has worked with organizations including the El Camino College Foundation, the EPA, and other environmental-related agencies in D.C. and in the Los Angeles area. She holds a master's degree from the University of Southern California and a bachelor's degree from Georgetown. You can read her full bio on the podcast page at nonprofitleadersnetwork.com. Susan, to kick us off, could you share a few words about Grades of Green and the work that you're doing?
Sure. Grades of Green is an international nonprofit that inspires and empowers students in the school community to protect the environment. And we hope that we are changing the course of the future by making environmental protection second nature in young kids and their families, too.
Mm-hmm. And environmental affairs has been getting a little more attention in the news lately. Has that impacted the awareness of your organization?
Well, I can't draw a straight line, but I do think that there is a reason why more schools are going on our website and registering. We've seen an uptick lately. We did a lot of work to improve our website and make it more, search engine optimization and some other things, but I don't know. I certainly feel the pressure to take some action, and I think students and teachers do too. So I think there may be some connection.
Now, I understand that you've stepped into the role. You're the first full-time staff member for the organization, or at least the full-time executive director.
I'm the first full-time executive director, yes. Previously, there were 4 founders of the nonprofit who'd been sharing the role, and they founded the nonprofit in 2010 and had been doing work towards creating it prior to that. So over the years, they, had, life happens and they have children and they wanted to do other things. And it is, it's a full-blown nonprofit now. And so they really were in a place where they wanted and needed somebody to come in and be the leader.
Great. And as the person who stepped in to fill that role, was that a fairly smooth transition, or have there been some bumps along the way?
Well, it's only been since November that I've been full-time, and I must say that they did a really great job of preparing for this moment. And that is, they've been wanting to do it for quite a while, and they knew it was on the horizon. They actually were ready to do it a year prior, but the funds weren't there. So since it's been on their radar for quite a while, I think it was a smoother transition than some people have, let's say, as opposed to the death of a founder or something like that. So there was a lot of planning that went into me taking on this role. Nonetheless, it's still early. I've only been doing it a couple months, and there are challenges, and there's also just a lot of joy too, because they're ecstatic. The staff is really happy to have a full-time person now, and when I make some suggestions or some ideas or something, oh my gosh, I'm so glad, we've been waiting for somebody to do this, and so they're so appreciative. So that makes it really rewarding for me.
That's great. So what are some of the things you think that the board did well to help prepare and to make that transition smooth?
They had a strategic plan that an entire planning process that they went through last year. A lot of the plan was get an executive director. So, step one, yes, check that off, did that. And they also thought a lot about the roles of the staff and the current founder. They thought about the organizational structure so that when I came in, things were in place. Yet they also have left me enough leeway to come in and make my own assessment of things, right? They've hired me as an expert to say, okay, what should we change? We thought we want this, but we don't want to pigeonhole Susan into our way of doing things. We want her expertise and her knowledge, and we want her to apply that and provide some suggestions. And that's kind of where we are right now. We need to go back and review the strategic plan and take it into our next fiscal year, which is going to start in July. So it's super exciting. It's super fun and very, very challenging in a great way.
Mm-hmm. And some people might say the first 2 or 3 years even is kind of a honeymoon period in a lot of ways. Do you sometimes feel that way?
Yeah, somebody told me once that it takes a year to learn your job. And I thought, well, that's kind of funny. But then it's really true. It's like a whole cycle, a whole growth year cycle that you have to go through for your budget planning and your program implementation and your analysis and all these things. It's really nice to go through one cycle of that and say, okay, I got that under my belt. Now what would I change? So I think it is important to take a while and not rush it, although I constantly want to rush things. I want to check off the boxes and say, doing this. I want to move forward quickly because the organization is also growing at the same time. On the other hand, I do realize that you need to take a deep breath and say, Rome wasn't built in a day. Things are going to take some time, and it's wise to take the time because it's hard to come into an organization and make abrupt changes or what feels like abrupt changes when folks have been doing things on their own and going a certain way, as it is in any organization, right? But particularly when you have a founder-led organization. So I'm balancing moving forward and yet taking in all the feedback and knowledge that I need to make smart decisions, and then bringing people along the way with those decisions. So that's what I think about every day.
Mm-hmm. A lot of consensus building, I'm sure.
Yes, but fortunately, the culture in this organization has been very collaborative. They're like really collaborative planning and working, and so that style lends itself, I think, to me coming on board now and seeing how things are done and getting input and having my input heard. So that's really nice.
That sounds nice. And you have the benefit of coming from a pretty significant background in leading other nonprofits. Do you think that's helped you in coming into this role?
Yes, it really has. I have had the benefit of working with a working board and a very, very talented and hardworking board previously. I think I was actually a little bit spoiled because I came into this role, and just to give you an example, we have a large event that comes up, and it's our gala, and I had previously come from an organization that had a really big one, but I had this volunteer network that was so deep and so good. And so I come into this one and have to rebuild that. It's got some of it, but not to the extent that the other, older event had. So I have to rebuild that.
Mm-hmm. In your organizations before, I know Manhattan Beach Education Foundation, you talked about raising millions of dollars annually there. I would imagine that you had maybe a few more staff people to get things done.
We actually had a team. We did have a staff as well, a few more staff, but we also had a really, really in-depth volunteer team. So a lot of workers, there's a lot of people lending their support to the effort. And when it comes to the development side of Grades of Green, we haven't had that be as much of an emphasis, and it doesn't have the team that it needs. It's been remarkably well done. I mean, really, really well done considering, how few people were doing it before, and lots of great relationships and really good funders are in place. My challenge has been to to maintain those relationships and transition them. And I have found that is a challenge, I think, that probably any new executive director will have, whether you go as an executive director to a founder-led or just any other transition as an executive director. Maintaining relationships is hard from one person to another, and I really need to focus on that myself.
Mm-hmm. So what are some of the things that you're doing right now to help ease that process, that transition?
I'm putting in a couple of the structural things that we didn't have before, just basic support things. Like we didn't even have a customer relations management tool. We didn't have a database for our donors and our contacts, and we didn't have a database or a grant tracking system in place. So I'm putting those in. We also weren't on the same platform in terms of our technology, our computers. We were just making do with Google Docs and Excel in a really powerful way for what they were doing, but it was time to make a transition to more structured things that'll just ease our day-to-day lives and allow us to focus on getting more grants and doing our programs better.
Right. And has it been pretty easy to fund those system improvements?
We actually were really fortunate to get a nice grant to fund overhead type of costs. So that was really terrific. So a capacity building grant, I guess you could call it. And so that's been very helpful.
Very nice. And either in your current position or in a previous position, one question I always like to ask my guests, it's about failure. Because we all experience failure at some point in our lives. And one of the things that I found with a lot of executive directors that I talk to is they always feel like they're the only one. So, and it's always encouraging to hear other people about a struggle that they faced or something that could have been seen as a failure, but really was a success because it was a learning experience. Do you have one of those that you could share with us and with our listeners?
It's a fairly recent one, and it had to do with trying a new type of software and a new type of an appeal. This is just at my previous job, not at the Ed Foundation. And it was a failure in terms of raising money. But we did manage to make it into something that we ended up making it into like a PR campaign, and not the trite friend raising kind of campaign, but in terms of bringing awareness to our story and telling our story and creating all of the material and messaging and videos and about this story. So we ended up with a whole ton of information, but we just weren't able to turn that into money. And I felt really bad. And I went back and I looked at how did I make this mistake? So I thought, okay, I calculated, and what my basic mistake was in terms of the fundraising was I thought that each person on our board and each person that I got to be on my team would bring in 10 donors. And really they're going to bring in 3. And I was one of those, I should have smacked myself in the forehead, because of course they're not going to bring in 10. They were really that's way too many. And it was 3. So I was embarrassed about the money that was brought in, but I said I had showed everybody the math. So that was good. I had said, here's how I thought we were going to get X, and here's how we got Y. And they were like, okay, we see that. But then we ended up with all this other stuff. So that was better.
There was a lot of benefit to it, it sounds like.
Yes, there was. And it just wasn't the benefit that I was anticipating.
Right. And let's explore that a little further. The idea of each person getting 10 or each person getting 5, or that's something that I hear lay people come up with as ideas when they're thinking and brainstorming about fundraising. Why do you think 3 would be a better number than 10? And do you think that would be the same for any organization, or might it change?
That's a good question. I think if you just think about yourself and how much energy you might have, if I'm asking my board, say, how much energy does my board have to really go out and make multiple phone calls and have multiple conversations with people. And so kind of start there, like how many people do you need to talk to in order to follow up and have, maybe 5 meaningful conversations. And then of those 5 meaningful conversations, how many of those people are actually going to take action? So I would, you start with a bigger number and then you kind of drill down. And it was also a number that the gentleman that I was working with said was his number. I was like, well, I wish you told me that beforehand.
I think that's a good rule of thumb.
Yeah. He had the data to back it up.
So what do you see as, you've been in a few different organizations, and I'm sure you've seen a lot of different leaders and seen how people respond to your leadership. What do you see as the single most important trait for a nonprofit leader?
That's a very good question. I think a nonprofit leader has to persuade and cajole. If cajole might be too strong a word, but really need to be sort of the Pied Piper that's leading everybody along, because some people are there because they're working, other people are there just because they're passionate about it. Other people may be passionate, but you have to motivate them to really want to help you, to really become invested. And I had tremendous success, I think, and gratification, because the board and the volunteers at the Education Foundation in Manhattan Beach all were rallying behind us and together. We were able to bring everybody together to work on behalf of this common mission and avoid some of the conflicts that other education foundations had between the various constituents. And so consensus building, I think that's really key. And again, it's just been important because you're working with a variety of different kinds of people who are motivated by a bunch of different things, and you have to sort of be able to get everybody and find out what is motivating them and bring them along and get them to be part of this process, and then feel the passion, and then it becomes sustainable, and it becomes that, success breeds success. Right? So we had this successful board because we had awesome people on it. And then we had an even better board because awesome people wanted to join it and be with other great people. So it became self-fulfilling. Nice.
As we close, do you have any words to provide maybe some inspiration or encouragement for some nonprofit leaders who are listening in?
I think it's important to always go back to why you started in this and what you were passionate about. A lot of my day I spend thinking about the bottom line, and I have to on some level, but I have to also remind myself of where and why I'm here. And I'm really, really glad, particularly this February 2017, to be working on environmental issues and environmental protection. It's never felt more important and embattled. So I think just tapping into that passion and everything else just sort of falls into place.
And that's something that's so easy to forget sometimes in the moment.
Yeah.
Well, great. Susan, thank you so much for joining us today. And thank you to all our listeners for everything you do to make the world a better place.
Thanks for listening to the Nonprofit Leaders Network podcast with Kirsten Bullock. If you like what you just heard, we hope you'll check out our prior episodes and that you'll pass along our web address, nonprofitleadersnetwork.com, to your friends and colleagues in the nonprofit sector.